There is a Forest Service district office in Libby, Montana. It sits on a two-lane road near the edge of town. A low building with vinyl siding and a parking lot that holds maybe 12 cars. Inside, there are rows of gray filing cabinets. There are topographic maps pinned to corkboards. There are stacks of survey binders organized by watershed, by year, by project code. The people who work there drive pickup trucks and wear green uniforms and process paperwork that most Americans will never read and never need. To think about. In the fall of 1991, a four-person survey team returned to that office from a field assignment in the Kootenai National Forest. They filed their report on a Tuesday. It was a standard timber and terrain survey, the kind conducted hundreds of times per year across the National Forest System. 22 pages. Photographs attached. GPS coordinates logged. By Friday of that same week, the report had been sealed. No follow-up survey was ever commissioned. No findings were published. No action items were generated. The file was placed in administrative holding under a designation that removed it from standard records requests. And it has remained there for more than 30 years. The Forest Service has never publicly explained why. What the four surveyors encountered in that drainage. What they wrote in those 22 pages. And why a routine field report required immediate sealing. None of that has been officially answered. But the Ktunaxa people, whose ancestral territory covers this ground, already knew something was wrong with that land. They had known for a very long time. And the instructions they left about it were not vague. They were not symbolic. They were exact. This is what they said. And this is what has happened to the people who did not listen. The Kootenai National Forest covers 2.2 million acres in the far northwestern corner of Montana. It shares a border with Idaho to the west and with Canada to the north. The Cabinet Mountains run through its southern portion. The Purcell Mountains anchor its northern edge. Snowpack in the high drainages can persist into July. In autumn, the valleys fog early, and the light goes flat before 4 in the afternoon. This is Ktunaxa territory. The Ktunaxa, sometimes written Kootenai in American records, Kootenai in Canadian ones, have occupied this land for thousands of years. Their oral record is among the most geographically specific of any indigenous nation in North America. When Ktunaxa oral tradition references a location, it references it precisely. A specific ridge, a specific creek confluence, a specific elevation. The warnings embedded in their oral knowledge are not metaphor. They are coordinates. One such warning concerns a drainage system in Lincoln County, in the northern section of the Kootenai National Forest. The drainage feeds into Grave Creek, which itself flows southwest toward the Kootenai River. The warning has been documented in ethnographic records and in the accounts of Ktunaxa elders recorded across several generations. Its essential content has remained consistent. Do not enter this drainage after the first frost of the season. Do not enter it alone. Do not cross the second creek confluence moving upstream. And if you have already crossed it, move directly out. Do not stop. Do not look for the way you came in. Those are not spiritual guidelines. Those are operational instructions. The kind of instructions you give someone when you already know what happens if they are not followed. They contain seasonal specificity. They contain a physical landmark as a threshold marker. They contain a behavioral directive for an emergency. Someone spent time learning exactly where the danger begins and exactly what to do when you have already made the mistake of entering. The question worth sitting with is this: instructions that precise do not come from imagination. They come from experience. In 1935, anthropologist Claude Schiffer recorded oral accounts from K-Tunexa elders in the course of his decades-long documentation of the nation's knowledge systems. Among his field notes, which are archived at the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, is a translated passage concerning what he described as a class of place regarded not as sacred but as contaminating. The word used in the original K-Tunexa, which Schiffer struggled to translate accurately, carried a meaning he eventually rendered as something between infectious and permanently altered, not a place that was dangerous the way a cliff is dangerous, a place that changed the people who moved through it. He recorded that the K-Tunexa did not avoid such places out of superstition. They avoided them because they had watched what happened to people who went in, and the changes those people underwent were consistent enough and serious enough that the nation encoded the avoidance into instruction rather than leaving it as warning. Your national forest, your public land, open to visitors 365 days a year, and a record stretching back further than written American history in this region, of a place within it that does something to the people who enter it. Before we reach the case from 2019, the one that closed the same way the 1991 survey did. Without explanation and without follow-up, stay with this. What you are about to hear is not a single incident. It is a pattern. And the pattern was documented long before any Forest Service employee ever set foot in that drainage. In the fall of 1991, the Forest Service survey team assigned to the Grave Creek drainage consisted of 4 employees from the Kootenai National Forest District. Their assignment was a standard terrain and timber inventory, part of a broader assessment of the northern forest sections being considered for a wilderness study area expansion review. The work was routine. The area had been accessed before, though not extensively. The survey was expected to take 4 days. They returned after 3. The 22-page report they filed has never been released. Every attempt to obtain it through the Freedom of Information Act has resulted in the same response. The document is exempt from disclosure under a provision covering pre-decisional internal deliberations, meaning it was classified as part of an ongoing internal decision-making process. That classification was applied the same week the report was filed. It has never been lifted. What can be established from public record is the following. 3 of the 4 surveyors resigned from federal service within 18 months of filing that report. 1 left within 60 days. Their departure records are publicly accessible and show no disciplinary action, no performance issues, no noted cause. 2 of them had been with the Forest Service for more than a decade. 1 had 12 years of field experience in the Northern Rockies. People with that kind of tenure do not typically walk away from federal employment without reason. The 4th member of the survey team did not resign. He requested a transfer to an administrative position at the regional office in Missoula. His transfer request, which is part of the public HR record, cited a preference for non-field work. He was approved for the transfer within 3 weeks, faster than most such requests are processed. He spent the remaining years of his federal career at a desk. He never returned to field work. None of the 4 have given public statements about the survey. None have spoken to journalists, to researchers, or to the online communities that have investigated this file over the past 2 decades. They are not difficult to locate. They have simply chosen not to speak. The K-Tunexa warning about the Grave Creek drainage specifies that people who cross the second creek confluence and remain in the drainage do not leave the same. That is the precise language preserved in the ethnographic record. Not that they are harmed, not that they are injured, that they do not leave the same. 4 federal employees entered that drainage in October of 1991 after the first frost. 3 of them never worked outdoors again. Pull back from that single survey team and look at the longer record, and a structure emerges that is harder to dismiss. The K-Tunexa warning about Grave Creek is not an isolated piece of tribal knowledge. It belongs to a category of geographic restriction that appears independently across multiple nations in the northern Rocky Mountain corridor, nations with separate languages, separate oral traditions, and no documented mechanism for coordinating their knowledge systems in the pre-contact period. The Salish people, whose traditional territory covers much of western Montana and northern Idaho, maintain named places within their oral record that carry restrictions structurally identical to the K-Tunexa warning. Enter only in the company of others. Enter only in certain seasons. Do not pass a specific physical threshold, a rock formation, a tree line, a creek bend without a specific form of preparation. And if you have already passed it without that preparation, your obligation is to move out immediately, without stopping, and to report what you experienced to an elder before sleeping. That last element, the requirement to report before sleeping, appears in Salish oral tradition concerning at least 3 specific locations in western Montana. It also appears in K-Tunexa tradition concerning the Grave Creek drainage. 2 nations, 2 languages, the same instruction. The Blackfoot Confederacy, whose territory covers the eastern slopes of the Rockies from Montana up into Alberta, has a documented category of place referred to in translated records as land that stays with you. The term describes locations that do not release the people who enter them cleanly. Not physically. Something else. Blackfoot oral tradition, as documented by ethnographer Walter McClintock in the early 20th century, describes individuals who entered such places and returned behaviorally changed in ways that were specific and consistent. Difficulty with memory of the time spent inside, a persistent sense of being watched, and in several recorded cases, an inability to accurately describe what had happened while inside. This is not the language of ghost stories. It is the language of a clinical observation repeated across generations until it became instruction. The Nez Perce, whose territory runs through central Idaho and into Oregon and Washington, have a related but distinct category, locations where the tribe's oral record explicitly warns against overnight stays. Not because of predators or terrain, but because the night there is not the same night. That phrase appears in Nez Perce oral tradition, as translated and recorded by Archie Finney in the 1930s. It was recorded as a serious instruction, not as a story. Now place those 4 nations on a map. The K-Tunexa in the northwest corner of Montana, the Salish through the western valleys, the Blackfoot along the eastern range, the Nez Perce through the central corridor. Their territories overlap at the edges. Their languages are unrelated. And running through the land, all 4 of them occupied, there is a stretch of wilderness, roughly 200 miles long, anchored at its northern end by the Kootenai National Forest, where each of these nations independently identified locations requiring identical structural restrictions. In 1977, that stretch of land was designated by the Forest Service as a wilderness study area. It was a candidate for permanent wilderness protection. In 1993, 2 years after the sealed survey, It was quietly removed from the Wilderness Study Area list. No public explanation was recorded for the delisting. The administrative record contains a notation that the area did not meet the criteria for wilderness designation, but the specific criteria it failed are not cited. The decision was not appealed. It received no press coverage. Your federal land management system processed that decision, filed it, and moved on. On September 14, 2019, a private contractor named in public search and rescue records only by his initials, a standard practice in Montana SAR documentation for non-fatality cases, entered the Grave Creek drainage in the Kootenai National Forest. He was conducting a timber inventory for a Forest Service contract. The work was similar in nature to the 1991 survey. He was alone. It was after first frost. The Lincoln County area had recorded its first frost of the season on September 9th. He did not cross the Second Creek confluence. His GPS track, which was recovered as part of the search and rescue documentation and has been partially summarized in publicly accessible SAR records from Lincoln County, shows that he moved up the drainage for approximately 2 miles before his recorded track stops. The device continued functioning. It logged timestamps throughout, but it recorded no movement for the next 19 hours. 19 hours. In a drainage. With a functioning GPS device. No movement. He was reported overdue by his contracting firm on September 16th, when he failed to check in for a second consecutive day. Lincoln County Search and Rescue deployed on the morning of September 17th. They located him later that same day, approximately 4 miles from the point where his GPS track had ended. He was physically unharmed. He was ambulatory. He was found sitting against a tree at the edge of a forest road, which means he had moved 4 miles from his last recorded position without his GPS logging a single step of that movement. His device was functioning. It had battery. There was no reported malfunction. When asked by SAR personnel how he had reached the road, he said he did not know. When asked what he had done during the previous day and a half, he said he did not remember. When asked if he had been injured or ill, he said he did not think so. The SAR incident report, available through Lincoln County records, classifies the event as a navigation and equipment anomaly. That classification exists in SAR documentation to describe cases where a subject became disoriented and equipment behaved unexpectedly. It is not a classification that invites further inquiry. It closes the file. No medical follow-up is recorded in any public document. No further investigation was opened by the Forest Service. The contractor did not return to complete the inventory. The contract was quietly reassigned. The K2NEXA warning says, "Do not enter after first frost. Do not enter alone. Do not cross the Second Creek confluence." He entered after first frost. He entered alone. His GPS track ends before the second confluence, meaning he stopped. Or something stopped him. At almost exactly the threshold the K2NEXA identified. He did not cross it. And he still came back with 19 hours he cannot account for. The warning was not about what happens when you cross the threshold. The warning may have been about what happens when you get close to it. That is a detail the oral record does not explain. It has not been explained by anyone. It will not be explained here because there is no explanation to give. Move forward. The Kootenai National Forest is open right now. It receives approximately 1.8 million visitors per year. Families camp in its valleys. Hunters access its ridgelines in September and October. Hikers walk its trails in summer. A significant portion of its road network is open to public motor vehicle access, including Forest Road 336, which provides access to the Grave Creek area. There are no posted signs in that drainage referencing tribal knowledge. There are no interpretive panels at the trailheads discussing K-Tunaxa oral tradition. There is no notation in the Forest Service's publicly available visitor information for the Kootenai that any portion of the forest carries indigenous restrictions. Of this nature, the 1991 survey report remains sealed. A FOIA request filed by a researcher in 2021, documented in online records from a transparency advocacy organization, requested all documents related to a 1991 terrain survey in the Grave Creek watershed. Lincoln County, Kootenai National Forest. The response came back in full. 22 pages. Every page fully redacted. Not partially redacted, with sections blacked out and others visible. Fully redacted. Each page returned as a solid black rectangle. The predecisional exemption used to seal the file in 1991 is still active, 32 years after the survey was filed. The internal decision it was supposedly informing has apparently never been finalized, because the exemption only holds as long as the decision process is ongoing. The Forest Service has effectively kept the decision open for 3 decades to prevent the document from entering public record. That is not a bureaucratic accident. That is a sustained administrative choice. In 2017, the K-Tunaxa Nation won a landmark case before the Supreme Court of Canada concerning their right to protect a sacred site, Jumbo Valley, in British Columbia, from development. The court's decision acknowledged the K-Tunaxa's relationship to specific geographic locations as a protected right under Canadian law. The decision was significant. It was also geographically limited. It applied to the Canadian portion of K-Tunaxa traditional territory. The American side of that territory, the Kootenai National Forest, the Grave Creek drainage, the land covered by the 1991 survey, has no equivalent legal recognition. The K-Tunaxa Nation's knowledge about this land, including their specific warnings about specific drainages, carries no formal standing in American land management decisions. The Forest Service is not required to post those warnings. It is not required to consult the K-Tunaxa oral record before issuing contracts for surveys in that area. It is not required to tell the 1.8 million annual visitors to the Kootenai National Forest that at least 4 indigenous nations identified a corridor within that forest as a place that changes people, and that the last federal employees to formally investigate a portion of that corridor came back and never worked outside again. None of that is required. So none of that is done. The drainage is accessible by road. The frost comes in early September. Hunting season peaks in October, when the drainage sees its highest foot traffic of the year. The people who enter it this fall will not have read the K-Tunaxa warning. They will not know that 3 Forest Service employees with a combined 30 years of field experience walked out of there and handed in their credentials. They will not know about the contractor who sat down against a tree 4 miles from his last GPS point with 19 hours he could not explain. They will park their trucks on Forest Road 336, and they will walk in, and most of them will walk out, and they will not know how close they came to the threshold the K-Tunaxa have been marking for longer than the United States has existed. Your national forest, your public land, your hunting season, and somewhere in a filing cabinet in Libby, Montana, 22 pages that someone decided you should never read. Go back to that office in Libby. The parking lot holds 12 cars. The vinyl siding has weathered some since 1991, but the building looks essentially the same in recent photographs. The corkboards still hold topographic maps. The binders are still organized by watershed. The work that happens there is still routine, permits processed, surveys logged, visitor inquiries answered by people in green uniforms who know this land the way people know land when they have spent careers walking it. Somewhere in that building, in a gray filing cabinet or its digital equivalent, a sealed folder exists. It has existed there for more than 30 years. It contains 22 pages written by 4 people who went into the Grave Creek drainage and came back changed enough that 3 of them never went into any field again. The folder does not have a warning label. It does not require one. The administrative designation that seals it is sufficient to keep it away from public record indefinitely, as long as the Forest Service continues to classify an internal decision as ongoing. It has done so for 32 years. The K-Tunexa did not seal their warning. They passed it down. They made sure it was specific enough to follow and durable enough to survive the loss of the people who first learned it. They encoded into language exactly where the danger starts, exactly what season to avoid, and exactly what to do if you are already inside. The Forest Service encoded its warning differently. They made it invisible. They made it a black rectangle on a FOIA response. They made it a sealed file in a building, in a town most Americans have never heard of. Both of those choices tell you something. The K-Tunexa warning tells you where to stop. The sealed survey tells you that the people whose job it was to go past that point, whose job it was to document what is in that drainage and report their findings to the public, made a different choice when they came back. They chose the same option the K-Tunexa had recommended for generations. They chose not to speak of it. The frost in Lincoln County comes in early September. The drainage is accessible now. The file is sealed. And somewhere between those 3 facts, there is something the 1991 survey team understood by the end of their 3rd day that they have spent the rest of their lives not saying. They came back. That is what we know. The rest is in those 22 pages. And those pages are black.